Hello, everyone. Welcome to this conference today, 30th of June, 2021. We're very pleased that you could join us. Welcome to discuss a very topical and important aspect of our lives here in Africa, but also more particularly in Uganda. I would like to thank Alliance Française for organizing this conference. They've been, the pioneers in sponsoring and supporting this debate on the return of artifacts and restitution of our artworks in Uganda. This debate is alive in many parts of the world, but also in Africa, in Kenya, in Rwanda, in South Africa, all those places where, the colonial era led to the evacuation of artifacts and other items, many times in an illicit way. And these artifacts were sent and now are to be found in museums in some of these Western capitals, in Paris, in London, in Madrid, and places like that. So there's a debate now about the return of these artifacts. But this debate is part of a wider debate. It's part of a wider debate on decolonization, because you see, even though many of our African countries attained independence in the late 60s, early 60s, the phenomena and the legacy of colonialism are continuous. So the debate on addressing historical injustices, the debate on reparations, the debate on restitution, the debate on addressing those impunity of the colonial past is alive, and these are some of the issues that we're going to be dealing with. Today, we are very privileged to have a team, panel of experts to help us address this question. But before I address and introduce each of them, let me welcome our friend Tristan. Tristan is the head of animation project manager in Alliance Française. I don't know whether we can see your face, Tristan. Well, he is the one who has helped to put all of this together, and we are very grateful that you have been coordinating the effort. Next to Tristan is Charity Atakunda. Charity, if you can just wave a little bit. Atakunda, not Natkunda.
Yes.
Very close, Atakunda. And, yeah. Charity is a visual artist, and she's been very active on the Ugandan scene for over 6 years. She used to work also with Alliance Française, and she's a graduate of Makerere of Uganda Christian University in Industrial and Fine Art, and quite a lot of experience, and has exhibited in places including in Israel, and her work has been commissioned by the CNN, BBC, and London School of Economics, and so on. So she's a formidable personality in the subject that we are discussing, and we really look forward to hearing from you. Charity, welcome.
Thank you.
Yes. Together with Charity, we have Nelson and Dabo Abiti. Yes, Nelson, you're welcome. Nelson is also very experienced in the field of art and preservation and heritage. He has been working for 10 years as a curator for ethnography and history at the Uganda National Museum. He's also a PhD student at this moment, University of Western Cape Town in South Africa. And I'm very pleased to know that he has been also working with the British Museum. So he can really tell us what is inside the British Museum that needs to be brought back, and whether things should be kept there, or they should be given to us on loan. There are some of those controversial aspects of curation. But you're most welcome, Nelson, and we look very much forward to hearing from you.
Thank you.
Last but not least is Frederick Nsibambi. I think of all of us, he has the longest CV and longest time spending on these issues of heritage, 18 years, and he's been working on the safeguarding, developing, and promotion of cultural heritage and education, cultural rights promotion, and community museums. He's going to just be the person to introduce the subject to us. What is it about? Why is it important? What are the values? And so on. I'll give you some more about what he will say. But Frederick has a master's degree in economics and administration from the University of Catania. Is that the way you pronounce it? Catania? In Italy? Yes?
Yes, that is very true. It's called Catania.
Catania. And a postgraduate diploma in museums and heritage studies from the University of Cape Town, South Africa, and a bachelor's of arts degree in tourism from Makerere University. He has written and published many articles on cultural heritage and museum, and right now he works for an NGO in this field. Very welcome, Frederick. We look forward to hearing your views on very important subjects. So, like I said, the topic that we are discussing today is whether we are capable of hosting, promoting, and protecting returned heritage. I have a bit of a problem with that title, but it is provocative, and for that purpose, I think we'll work with it. It is provocative. Can we keep artifacts? Do we have the capacity to keep those if they are returned to us? Do we value these relics, these artifacts? What is the meaning of these artifacts? And how come we haven't been able to maintain the little that we have here before we can seek to return artifacts that have been kept by foreign museums? Those are some of the issues that we have. But before I start, I thought I should share with you, I went around my house and found some artifacts which I thought would be relevant to this discussion. I have this guy. I think he is made in Congo, the former Zaire, and very interesting, representing a certain colonial order and time. I also have this in my house. I don't know where exactly she's from, but it's a depiction of art, I think also from Central African Republic or thereabout. Quite interesting.
DRC.
Quite interesting as an art piece. I also have in my house this item. I don't know, but it looks very, very, very good. I mean, it's wooden. But I don't know where it is, but I like it, so I collected it. I also have this guy. I don't know whether you can see him properly. A distended belly with something like a smoke pipe, big eyes. I also think that it is from DRC. But most of all, I have these guys. I don't know whether you can see them properly.
Yes, brilliant.
Yes, and I used these guys for the cover of my book. I wrote a book on British rule in Uganda and how it affected relations with Britain. So I could go on. I have some more artifacts, but just to show that it is possible for us to keep, first of all, to appreciate, because I didn't buy these yesterday when I was coming for the conference. So there's a value. We appreciate this art. Most of these items are not, Ugandan pieces. They are from the region. I have some Nigerian ones as well. I also know that there are many other Ugandans who keep and appreciate art. So the answer to that question, if it was a question, is that yes, we do appreciate the value, but also the question, can we keep these artifacts? And I see from my own experience that it is possible to have these artifacts and to protect them, even within a context. But I've already talked about Namibia, I've talked about Rwanda, South Africa, Kenya. Those countries are doing a great job of preserving, protecting, and promoting their artwork. So the question of whether we should even think about our capacity in holding, I think, shouldn't arise. But let me not get into the debate. Let's first hear from the experts. And I would like to begin with you, Fred. Fred, can you tell us, your topic is, of course, the meaning and value of restitution of art in the context of decolonization, both globally and in Uganda. You have 15 minutes, and I would like you to really touch on the most important things, and then we go to the next presenter. Over to you, Fred.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Makubuya, and good afternoon to you all, my fellow panelists, and the participants that are listening and watching us online. First and foremost, I'm very privileged to be part of this important discussion. It's a subject that is very dear to my heart, and I think this is why Nelson proposed my name to Tristan, because this is a very important subject in our lives. But it is also important that we discuss it carefully, we internalize it, we try to understand the intricacies related to repatriation, so that when we make our case, people can really understand what we mean and where we are coming from. But before I begin my presentation, I think I also have to tell us how you acquired those beautiful artifacts, so that when we are talking about repatriation, you are not among the culprits. Because they definitely are not Ugandan
but they're not stolen.
Okay, so my topic today, this afternoon, is about the meaning and value of restitution. And I prefer using the word repatriation as opposed to restitution. As OHT was already mentioned, sorry if I keep calling you OHT, because at least I know you from the other perspective of the Uganda Kingdom.
Thank you.
But I will try to stick to what majority of us are familiar with, Mr. Makubuya.
Correct.
Yes, so the notion of repatriation of art, especially museum objects from Europe to Africa, is gaining a lot of attention. And many people, including academic institutions, civil society organizations, politicians, as well as policymakers, are now joining the debate and the discussion. And as most of us might have realized, one of the statements that was made by the former president of France is that African cultural heritage can no longer remain a prisoner of European museum. And I think for us, this was a very important statement coming from a leader of one of the powerful countries in Europe. And because of this statement and zeal by Mr. Sarkozy, the French Parliament in 2018 passed a law to return 26 looted royal artifacts to Benin and a sword belonging to an anti-colonial fighter to Senegal. I think Nelson is going to talk more about this, so I don't want to get into the details. But what is important also for us to notice that we need to think about engaging countries like the UK, because I think UK is keeping a lot of artifacts from Africa and many of its former colonies. But I think there hasn't been enough pressure on the UK to try and return or start the discussion on repatriating artifacts from Africa. I think the pressure that UK, that has been put on UK, I think is mainly from Nigeria and Ethiopia. We are yet to see real pressure from other countries, including Uganda, because there is quite a lot of artifacts from Uganda that are still that are being kept in the museums in the UK. We might also have noticed that efforts to campaign for the return of African art has not just started. The effort started way back in the 1970s and in the 1990s. And we've had statements like, or phrases like Sankofa. I think this is from one of the communities in Nigeria, which literally means go back and get it. And this is what exactly we are discussing. And also after 1994, I think South Africa there was this popular word in South Africa called Maibuye. And I think Nelson might be aware that at the University of Western Cape, there is a whole archive called Maibuye. And this, simply means, may it return, Africa, may it return. And it's about returning what belongs to Africa in terms of knowledge, in terms of artifacts, in terms of power, in terms of authority, in terms of pride, which we had lost during the colonial period. So as we've already noted, the discussion about repatriation is gaining momentum, and I think we don't need to remove the foot from the accelerator. We just need to maintain the momentum. But as we discuss the repatriation, I think it is really important that we really acquaint ourselves with some of the common terminologies. Like very often we talk about decolonization, but do we all understand it from the same perspective? We talk about repatriation, and restitution. Do we all understand what it means? So in terms of decolonization, I think there has been a tendency for many of us to look at decolonization or colonialism from a political perspective. And in that case, if we only restrict ourselves to politics, then we can go back and home and relax, because decolonization in terms of politics has already taken place. When we've had a sudden change of regimes in the 1950s, 1960s, and until 1990s, when South Africa was among the last countries to gain their independence. So if we were to restrict ourselves to politics, we would, wash our hands and say all is done. But we need to look at decolonization more broadly. And if we do that, then we shall all agree that that Africa is still under colonialism, or it is still under neo-colonialism in many aspects of our lives, including our arts and our museums, which are still on colonial hills. I emphasize arts because, as we might all know, even our arts these days are so much influenced by what by the European, knowledge and discipline. Yes. Our museums and yes, narratives. Our museums, in as much as we are politically independent, they are still situated on colonial hills. They are not among the, they are not in the communities. I keep wondering, why can't we have a museum in Kisenyi? Why can't we have a museum in Katanga? But we have it where the colonial masters felt it should be, and that is the National Museum. It is just of recent that we started having community museums in different parts of Uganda. But the unfortunate bit of it is that they are also picking from the National Museum, which is not helping us a lot in terms of trying to think about museums from the Ugandan or African perspective. So I think as we discuss the rest of the sessions, we need to really think about what decolonization means in our context as Ugandans and as Africans. What about restitution or repatriation? I know many of us, we've read about it and it is not a new subject, but for purposes of emphasis, repatriation is the return of cultural property, frequently referring to ancient or looted art, to their country of origin or former owners or their heirs. The cultural property items in question are physical artifacts of a group or a society that were taken by another group, usually in an act of looting. So I think the point to note here is that whenever we are talking about repatriation, what we need to bear in mind is that repatriation can only happen after objects were acquired by another party in an ethical manner. Just like we are talking about the Luzila head, which was stolen, and just like we are talking about objects that were acquired from Congo by Mr. Apollo Makubuya. So we need to, you will tell us later on how those artifacts were acquired. But repatriation means that we return cultural properties to their original owners. But how can repatriation be done? Repatriation can be done because I think as for now, we really think about repatriation in terms of moving objects from the global north to global south, which is true because most of our artifacts were taken, were looted by the countries from Europe. But repatriation can also happen, can also take place where we can have objects from the global south repatriated to global north, because I'm very sure even Africans are keeping artifacts from Europe. So should one day European countries wake up, I think they also have a right to claim some of the artifacts that we are keeping. In other cases, repatriation can also can happen within the global south, because if there are objects, for instance, that were taken by Kenyans from Uganda, by Ugandans from Congo, if the Congolese at one point wake up, I think we will have to return those objects. The other angle of repatriation can be within our national borders, national boundaries. I look at the example of the Banyankore, for instance, because I think at one point the Ankole Kingdom or the Obugabe, they were demanding for the return of Bajendanwa, which is their royal drum and kept in the National Museum. So I think if they also put up a spirited fight to have their objects returned to Ankole, I think we need to have a dialogue. We need to have a discussion with them. And also, as we've just said, the discussion of whether they have the capacity to maintain these drums shouldn't arise because the drums are much important in their culture and in their lives as a Banyankole, and more so as a cultural institution.
You have five more minutes.
Yes, I'm about to. I think I have 2 more issues to raise here. So, okay. In terms of the value of repatriation, I think, and actually that is for me the main purpose of this conference. We need to think about the importance of repatriation why are we asking this? Why are we asking for the repatriation of these artifacts? First and foremost, if we are able to return these artifacts, we will be able to, or the Africans will be able to reconnect with their heritage and their ancestors as well. For instance, in Namibia, we had the Hereros and the Namas repatriated, and I think the Namibians were able to accord decent burials to these people. But also, it helps in restoring authority and power. For instance, in the Bunyoro Kingdom, up to now, they are using a replica of the royal stool. The original stool is kept in Pitts Rivers Museum in England. And for them, they feel they need to have that stool returned if they are to think about real power and authority of the kingdom. Then the return can improve diplomatic relations. I think we've had this already. The French
I see we have lost your voice.
We have lost Fred, yeah.
I think he was talking about the diplomacy and improved relationship between the West and African countries. Did you want to talk about the support that the French gave to Rwanda in rebuilding their cultural center? Can you hear us now? Dear. Anyway, maybe Nelson, you want to help close off that argument that he was talking about, Fred?
Yeah, I think I could supplement his back.
Oh,
Fred,
okay.
are you
Yes,
back?
yes, I'm back.
Summarize your point.
Yes, sorry, there was a phone call coming in, and yet I'm using my phone to connect to the internet. And then the other point I had on the value of repatriation is on giving African Museum a global attention. I think if we are able to get some of these objects that are kept in European museums and they have been viewed by prominent people in the world, if they come back to Africa, I think that would be an opportunity for our museums also to have this international limelight. But as I conclude, the number of concerns that I want us to think about so that our discussion is well guided. So as Mr. Nelson Makubuya said in his opening remarks, if we are talking about repatriation of African art or objects, museum objects, are we ready? Are we ready to, do we have the necessary competences? Do we have the necessary infrastructure? Do we have the financial resources to maintain these objects the way they have been maintained for centuries in the European museums? Two, the objects we are talking about, they were taken out of Africa 100 years ago, 200 years ago. And we have a young generation. Currently, Africa is known to have the youngest generation in the world. So will the young people in Africa be able to reconnect with these artifacts or objects if they are returned to Africa? The last concern I had was in terms of the legal processes. We have some of our artifacts kept in the UK museums, and the current law in the UK doesn't allow the museums and other institutions like the British Museums and Albert Museum to remove objects from their collections. So is our Foreign Affairs Ministry, our Constitutional Affairs Ministry ready to engage their counterparts in the UK to start the negotiations? Because I don't think this discussion is going to end here. After here, we need to start engaging the relevant agencies so that we take the discussion further and maybe we get these objects returned to Africa.
Thank you very much, Frederick. I think if I were to just start off from the last point, but whose duty is it? Is it the duty of the Ministry of Constitutional Affairs? Is it the duty of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs? In Kenya, the people who took the Kikuyu victims, it wasn't the government of Kenya. If, in fact, you left it to the government of Kenya, you may find that they may never start on it because of the diplomacy that exists between these countries. Maybe they want to close a chapter. They are now partners with Britain on military support, on budget support, on all sorts of support. It is embarrassing to raise these matters which happened so many years ago. So there's a question: who really owns these artifacts? Are they governments that we have today, the post-colonial governments? Are they communities? In the case of Bunyoro, can any Bunyoro come up and claim, or should it be the king, or Mukama, or the Kabaka of Buganda? Those are the kind of questions that we would be interested in advancing. Or do they just need to have the support of the governments and so on? So I think that on the role of civil society and governments and so on, it's the right moment to ask Charity to come in. Let's hear a female voice before. I know that on the program it was supposed to be Nelson next, but Charity, can we take it on from there? You know, building on what Frederick is saying. You know, do we have capacity? Do we have civil society and governments involved in this? What is your experience? What are your views? We cannot hear you.
Unmute your. Yeah.
Sorry, guys. Yes, I think we're very capable. I also had a problem with the title because, you know, the argument was often in, that I often saw when I was following the news of objects being repatriated, especially in West Africa. And this was being led by activists and artists. The argument was often, you know, Africans don't know how to take care of their own, you know, objects. They're not capable of taking care of their own objects. So in this kind of logic makes it seem that we are incapable, but we are very much capable, because it's kind of like saying that, you know, like this, these objects which were being made before the technology, the air-conditioned rooms and the glass cases made with the specific temperature requirements, you know, these things didn't exist when these objects were made. These things were not even, you know, like the creators of the objects, the owners of the objects made them and managed to take good care of them until they were taken. So with that argument, I really find it very offensive and absolutely, it's just, I just find it to be like pure racism in your face. And I think that, you know, as a young Ugandan and someone who is relearning my own culture and my own society, and as an artist, I find it very sad that we don't have a great connection with our art, with our history, and I find there's a lack of appreciation. And I actually don't blame young Ugandans. I blame the powers that are in place. They still are very much under colonial influence. And you talked about the decolonization of Uganda itself. And I think that's maybe one of the places where we definitely have to start. Recently, when I was coming back from seeing my mom during Easter, I noticed a signpost in around Masaka area, like before you enter Masaka, where there's going to be a military museum. I don't know if you know about this. So I think for me, it shows that, you know, our leaders and our government do appreciate preserving certain things, but they're not necessarily these things. And I think that's where we also kind of need to look at, you know, decolonization. It's such a, it can do wonders basically for taking us further in terms of repatriating our objects and appreciating our art, our architecture, our history. And I think that, you know, with this kind of government and this kind of power, we can't wait for them. Ideally, it would be amazing if they could use their privilege and their access to the UK, to the Queen herself, or to whoever, to the Prime Minister. I don't know, like whoever they have access to. It's just a matter of a conversation, and you know, showing pride in your own country and in your own heritage and saying we want these things back. That's not very. I don't think that's very hard for our government to do. But I don't think that it's a support that they will give its people. And I also think that, you know, this kind of perspective also that we still have, which is a very colonial perspective of always dissecting our traditional African art or period, like in one space, and then the contemporary space. So, you know, when you're learning in art history and you're learning about African art, there's always traditional and then there's contemporary. So we're somewhat always dissected into these two spaces, and we kind of have like this strange identity crisis where it's like we're either in the traditional or in the contemporary. And I find that that's a bit of a problematic way of approaching also what should be preserved and valued, because I feel like young people today, it's not that they're not aware of our past and our heritage. I know very many young people. I didn't study in Uganda, but until university. But I know very many of my friends, and I've organized many events with the museum, and I see students are constantly taken in. They know these things. They know this information, but I feel like sometimes only focusing on antiquities, which they are very important. They're very, very important. Sometimes I think young people also need to experience the museum culture also in a modern sense. And I'm not talking about Rolex festivals and blankets and wines and this kind of thing. No, I'm talking about like having a diversity of preserved and showcased art, not just from 19th century, but also 20th century Uganda. Because when I'm at the museum, I mean, I've seen Idi Amin's cars, I've seen, I think these are some of the most modern, I guess, objects I've seen. But otherwise, it's usually what we traditionally, like I don't want to say traditionally. I find the current structure, and I don't think it's the museum's fault. I honestly think it's an issue of, once again, there is no financial support from the government, and they often rely on external projects to kind of fill in the gap for finances and things like that. But yeah, there is a lack of diversity in the actual history and or collective psyche of Uganda, as what museums often do, is what they hold all of these things and they contain all of these things, and we are able to interact with them and examine them and have conversations about them. So I think that it's it's very much something that we are lacking, and it hurts. I think it's terrible, and we have a hard time connecting with our heritage. And I mean, for me personally, I think that, you know, one of the steps that should be occurring is we should have a Ministry of Culture. We do not have a Ministry of Culture. I believe that the museum is under tourism, and like the UNCC and other institutions are under Ministry of Gender, Labor, and Social Development, which, you know, that shows like, you know, that our heritage is an export, which is, once again, it's a shame. And it also shows that, you know, for other cultural institutions that are trying to generate income, generate interest, in Uganda, there's no time for them. You know, when you fit them under gender, labor, social development, there's already so many things there. Where do you make time for the cultural scene today? So I find that also really disheartening, and I think that that's something certainly the government should, like, we should have a Ministry of Culture, and this ministry should be supporting these kinds of initiatives. So yeah, most of what I'm going to say is really mostly about how the government has failed us, but I also do think that I think I'm trying to remember who said it, but you were talking about how it's not the government that has led the way forward in yes, in repatriating objects, but rather it's been the civil society, the citizens, the artists, the
communities, yes,
the communities, the royals, I guess, like yeah. So who have yes, like for example, you, Mr. Makubuya, sorry, who have taken this initiative to start requesting for these objects back. So I think that we have to actively take that into our hands. We have to actively try to repatriate objects, but also in the process, we have to generate the interest within our society so that they can be more interested in their own heritage. We have to actively promote these stories. And I think that we are in the perfect time to do these things. I mean, social media, television, you know, we have all the tools to do it. We don't really have to wait for a government. We can just kind of just do it ourselves. And I think that, you know, yeah, yes.
5 minutes.
5 minutes. Actually, I will sum up, and I think there was a quote that I just wanted to share by James Baldwin, and he says that not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can change until it has been faced. History is not the past, it is the present. We carry our history with us. We are our history. If we pretend otherwise, we literally are criminals. And so just for us to reflect on history is not the past, it is the present. So I like to view our heritage as something that is constantly present. We shouldn't just restrict it to like an archaic old thing. It needs to be with us constantly. And I think that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Fantastic, Charity. I like many of your points, but two stand out. This question of where does this fall? Is it a Ministry of Culture? Is it Ministry of Antiquities? Is it Ministry of Labor? Is it Ministry of Tourism? I had a similar experience on this road renaming project or campaign that I was leading with other Ugandans. And we went to KCCA. KCCA is not, is not the authority on renaming Lake Victoria, for example. So where do you go? Do you go to Parliament? Do you go to? Because KCCA is not. I mean, KCCA, for example, is not responsible for the for the lakes, for the mountains,
right.
for the rivers.
Right.
But Ministry of Tourism, they are not sure they have the right authority. Ministry of Justice and Constitutional Affairs, they are not sure. Parliament is not sure. So the lack of a comprehensive policy and legislation on renaming and managing is really important. I'll come back to your other presentation. But the second that you raised is really on generation. You see, Frederick, in his submission, he was very provocative, and I will come to the acquisition of my artifacts later. But he was talking about generational interests in terms of the young generation. I think Charity is an example of a young person who is interested not just in the antiquities, but also, what happened to Yusuf Lule. Yusuf Lule is not a guy who lived in the 17th, 18th century, but do people know about Yusuf Lule? And where do they go? If you go to the museum today, I think the focus is really on the antiquities. It's not even addressing the colonial rule, that whole period of 68 years. You won't find very much about what the colonialists did in evacuating Mutesa out of Buganda in 1953, or dealing with the Nyabingi revolts in Kigezi, or dealing with the Banyoro and how they stole the artifacts from there. So it is in a sense inadequate. So I think that it's a point that we will develop. But we have Nelson. Nelson is the custodian and he can answer many of the questions that we have raised on capacity, on availability of resources, or value, and so on. In specific, his topic is to brief us on the status of things at a global level, but also in Uganda on this subject of restitution. Welcome, Nelson.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Alliance Francis, and thank you, Charity, Fred, and Nsibambi, and all viewers online. Colleagues, I hope you are hearing me very well.
Very well, thank you.
Yes, I'm just focusing on this topic of restitution, which we sometimes not try to amplify it in the country. I know by 2017, when the French President Emmanuel Macron made an announcement when he had visited West Africa, and November, to argue that it is a time to return the African art. And why was he raising the argument? It was because there was colonial injustice. These objects were not taken as a gift, were not taken as diplomatic items of exchange. They were objects that were plundered, looted, and it involved killing of human beings. So the whole idea, the injustice we see today, the problems we see amongst young generation was the deliberate uprooting of their identity and of their things that made them to feel who they are. It was that plunder. When you uproot their cultural root, you have taken away their roots, their powers. So that is the cause of current debate of restitution. In the past, restitution was narrowed to repatriate, just get the objects back, get the objects back. But we did not try to encompass. The restitution now is that when you are giving, give it with the reparations, give it in a way to rebuild the relations. So scholars following and Benedict Savo wrote immediately when they were commissioned to write a report by the president, and the report brought in a reaction amongst the colonial powers, especially the West, who had taken. They raised arguments whether African museums or African countries are prepared to receive these objects. That is the question of capacity. And the issue of conservation, the issue of infrastructure, whether the museums will be, and the others say these objects they acquired, they were given. So there's no evidence to show that those objects were plundered. So this has generated a lot of debate for us. This is a global context. Now, whereas some of the evidence had been shown that the archives were hidden from us of what happened when these objects were taken. I remember during colonial period when they left, they took away all the archive materials, and all this access to this information was difficult for African countries. That is part of the challenge we face, to show this object was taken and it had this problem. It is until recently that activists, through some of the historic activists and some legal experts and some of the people who have engaged to investigate what happened. You see in Nigeria, the 1897 Benin, if you see the objects when they are put in the museums in the West, they will just say Benin art, but they will never tell you these Benin art were looted during the attack in Benin Kingdom. There was an attack. They will not. Many people were killed. So all museums, and there was auction that happened from 1910 up to 1970s. Those Benin artifacts were auctioned amongst Western, US, Europe, even sometimes Asia, very expensive, $1 million. And who was benefiting? Was there an African country benefiting? So this was kind of injustice that we will really see in these objects. Now, when it comes to the demand for the objects, cultural objects, the truth is these cultural objects, the establishment of some of the museums in Africa was not for the interest of African people. The museums in Africa were established for the colonial governments. The museums then, which we have inherited, were meant to pursue the interests of colonial projects where they would use the museum as an infrastructure to collect objects and transfer them to Europe. That's number one. Two, when there are young administrators, soldiers, missionaries coming to colonize, they will use these materials to study and govern our societies, especially when they were divided into tribes and ethnic groups. That was a framework, an infrastructure meant to destroy our existing structures of chiefdoms, of kingdoms, of how society lived together. In other words, they wanted to divide society, and we were divided. Now, the impact which my colleague Fred would have raised, when the young people are not connected to the museums or cultural artifacts, they were in fact deliberately being disempowered not to access knowledge and cultural roots, because these things were already being planted. The level of civilization and technological development in some of these societies of ours were disrupted and destroyed deliberately. This is it. Colonialism did not come just for short time. It came and it has not ended. That's one thing which we need to do. Decolonization is a process, and we need to work on what decolonization. So one of the decolonization is in education, is in the museums, is in some religious institutions, the mindset in which we think about our culture. That's the thing. Then, let me leave it there. In Uganda, what happened? Was there return of cultural objects, or it never happened? It was there before independence. The activists, popular movements that demanded for independence were demanding for the return of cultural objects from the Western Europe. I give an example. Our former political activist, Abu Mayanja, who was a lawyer, in fact, in his early education at Makerere, he was dismissed from Makerere. And then later on, they took him to Oxford. Now there's a complexity there. And he went.
I think he went to Cambridge, not Oxford.
Yes, yeah, he went to Cambridge, not Oxford. And then during his time in Cambridge, he was shocked to see the resources and richness of cultural artifacts, and some of them which were taken from shrines, especially Chibuka. And I don't want to talk about the history of Chibuka, how Chibuka was one of the key activists in resisting against colonial rule. But through violence involving both missionaries and colonial agents, they went and destroyed the shrine, and they took the Chibuka objects to Cambridge by Reverend Roscoe. Now, when Abu Mayanja was there. One of the things his legacy did, even when he came back in the Lancaster conference, as the few Ugandans were there busy campaigning for independence, he was busy doing the legal process for working to return. In fact, the independence came together with the restitution of cultural objects. It was only that time. Now the question is, what happened after that? We were kept busy when we came. The process for us, the nation formation, the project which the British left for us was to cause us into confusion. Until recently, maybe we are still realizing that we had our past violences. It was a continuation of colonial violence in post-colonial violence. So which kept us busy, not causing us to think about the resources that were taken out of the country that were useful to rebuild our society, rebuild knowledge, and to empower our young citizens to know who they are, their future. So in other words, some objects like
five minutes.
Let me summarize. Some objects like Luzira heads that were taken by some of the colonial masters who were geographers, surveyors, which is very key important artifacts. They just picked the object. They did not give access for Ugandans to see it. It was taken that it will be in the records which we have that they are going to study in the lab in Europe. And when it was there, it was never returned. When the government, after independence in 1965, in 1970, asked for that object to return, they only say, I think the post-colonial government of Uganda cannot manage. We can only give you the copy. So what we have at the Uganda Museum is a replica. We are demanding for the original copy. But the whole thing is the laws, as Fred had said, the laws in UK is in the parliament does not allow all those objects to be returned to any country. Britain has a claim that all the objects that are there belongs to all universality. It is for the whole world, every person. I don't know how many Ugandans have access, even in fact, visa for going to UK is difficult. When some objects which are meant for us are there. Now lastly, Vivango, one of the objects in Kenya were returned from US. They are taken back to Kaya Forest. And those objects will be remade, they get rotten there in the forest and they make another one. So this idea, the interpretation and the meaning of cultural objects, the idea of permanence is Western patrimony. For us, we make cultural knowledge, cultural objects for use, and it is for purpose of transmitting knowledge. And the people are supposed to be making. But when you take the object and you kill the person who make it, what is the meaning? So our idea is return the existing one. Let's rebuild our society using those little remaining artifacts which are there. I think we need the campaign from the public awareness to ensure that restitution is not only the work of the museum, it is the work of the public, the citizens, and the government, as the Constitution enshrines for us to protect our property and heritage. Thank you very much.
Wow, thank you very much, Nelson. I think you have made a very strong argument about repatriation and the value of restitution. I think one or 2 points stick out for me. The first one is this question of, how people can access to go to London. You see, even just getting the visa has been complicated, but now if you don't have a COVID visa vaccination, it's even becoming more and more difficult to access. But beyond that is the point that you make, that the museum, especially as they were visualized and established, they were meant to project a certain cultural imperialism. In fact, when you go to the museum, even to this day, not only will you find just antiquated and relics and so on, but you find materials and pieces that depict a negative development or what they perceived as negative cultures in Africa. You know, if you see the artifacts, they project Karamojong as, you know, warriors, Baganda as people involved in witchcraft. They do not show any positive attributes to our communities. So in a sense, the museum became a tool for cultural furthering or projecting a supremacy of one culture over another culture, and so it's something that we must look at. But I want to open up the discussion and on the question of decolonization. You see, decolonization is such a fundamental aspect. It's not political. I agree. It's not just political. But you see, where can it stop? Because even as a country, Uganda, you know, Uganda is a colonial creation. What does decolonization mean to that extent? Are we going to say, you know, this country created by Britain for Britain to project British interests and hegemony? Are we going to continue with it, but say we are independent and decolonized? Where does one draw the line? That's one question. The other one is really on the point that Frederick made, and I think he was making it in jest or in some kind of a joke, but it is serious. Which artifacts are we talking about? The pieces that I shared at the beginning of the show, I can repeat it if you want, are objects that are being sold on the streets of Kampala by Congolese themselves. You know, even you, if you want to go and buy a piece like this one, you know, you can go and buy it for value. I mean, it's exchange. And there are many pieces which look like this. But the pieces that we are really concerned about are those, the kind that Nelson was talking about, that were forcefully taken away from our countries, many times in a manner that aimed to undermine cultural powers or cultural institutions or traditional, you know, the case of the drums in Ankole, the case of the drums in, these were symbols of power, symbols of, you know, cultural heritage. In Bunyoro, is also here in Uganda. They were taken away to weaken those institutions. There was no negotiation. Even the Ruzira head, you know, it was taken away under some kind of trickery that they wanted to test it. And then some geologists, archaeologists said that he had given it as a gift to the British Museum. How does Wilkinson, was that his name? What?
Wayland. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wayland. Where did he get the authority to give such a piece to the British Museum? So we must draw a distinction, Fred, the artifacts that we are talking about and how we acquired them. To the extent that the Congolese have exchanged, because these things are there for sale in a fair and a fair manner, I don't think there should be a problem. But those that were taken from Benin, you know, following a war of conquest, you know, they were grabbed, they were looted, they were plundered. I think those are the ones that are of critical interest to us, and they must be returned. And there's no point of saying that we can loan them to you, because you see, you cannot have a right over property which is stolen in law. You know, you cannot have a better because I have no capacity. And I think Charity made a valid point. It is part of colonialism and racism to even argue that we are incapable of holding and managing our own artifacts. So this moment is supposed to be open to people asking questions. I see in the chat room there are some questions from viewers. These questions, I'm going to read them. Do you want to say something, Frederick?
Yes, I had something to add on Nelson's submission.
Okay.
Yes, quickly, hearing him talking about the museum and it being a colonial creation, I entirely agree with him, because the museum, as he said, was created, and whatever was put in the museum was for purposes of studying Africans, studying Ugandans, so that they can better be managed. So, before they created these museums, African used to conserve. Whatever they put in that museum was collected from somewhere else. So how did those families, cultural institutions, kingdom used to keep those artifacts? And what terminologies did they use to describe those artifacts? Because we see the word museum comes with colonialism. And actually, for me, it forces me to ask the people at the National Museum to think about a local meaning of the word museum, because the museum, the word museum itself is not ours.
Let me say that in my language, in Buganda, a museum is depicted as a nyumba ya mayembe.
By that is a description. I just one word for a museum in Uganda or in Lugbara or in Rutoro. It's very difficult to come by. So as yes, if we are talking about decolonization, can we start from that point? What is our understanding of the notion of a museum?
Okay, your hand is still up. If you can put it down. Okay, Nelson, do you want to answer that question?
Yeah, I think I would just be that we need to rethink about, you may not change the name of the museum, but you can make use of the museum to reuse these materials to empower your communities with the idea of how they want to use and how they want to interpret and how they want to use the object. I think that's the main thing about the museum. Rethinking about the museum. What is the future of the museum is the debate which I think we will make, rather than going to complicate. We will need that history as a history which we inherited, but we need to make sure that we address the issues of colonial injustice using the same infrastructure of the museum. I think that is, to me, the best. Yeah.
Okay, I think we open it up to the public now, the viewers. The discussion, we've provided a background, some analysis, some provocative questions. We'd like to hear back from you. What do you think about this issue? Do we have the capacity? Is there value in these artifacts? Should we get into some collaboration with those that hold them? There are two questions that have been posted so far. One of them, and I will ask any of the panelists to answer. The first one is, do we have a database of these looted items from Uganda and where they are to be found? Because if that exists and it is put out in the open, people can then start clamoring. But an ordinary average person would never know which artifacts is kept in which museum and how to go about it. So maybe that should go to you, Nelson. Do you have a database?
We are still beginning to build a database. And as I want to tell you, these objects, when they were brought, there's no information properly on these objects. It's the same thing in the European museums. Are you getting me? The database, they are struggling like what we do here. The people who took the objects and the extent to which the object will be, like there was a soldier who will be here in Uganda, people like Lugard, when they reach home, they had the private collections and they donated the collections to there's Royal Geographical Society. Royal Geographical Society transfers it to the British Museum. So this is the process in which the objects can be. But in Uganda, they will just have objects without a particular name. We try to build a database right now, but it's not put on website. We are trying to build, especially on this cultural artifact. Now, access to this database in Western museums is not complete as you think. Some of the most sensitive objects that you know must need to come back and they have implications are not put on database. The ones where, which you like, the one you bought like in craft shops, where somebody, when he came to Uganda in 1930s and 1940s for during his tour, 1950s, 1960s, and bought it, and when he reached there, sometimes the house is full, gives it to the museum. Those ones are the ones you find the information in the database. So there's what we call provenance research. This provenance research is unfortunately being done by the same people whom we implicate. You understand? So the information we get is not accurate. And we still, that's why we need more engagement. That needs further forensic.
Okay.
I can use that term, which needs further forensic. And you will find they hide some information. When you go to archives, which were not opened, now they are being released, you'll find more information that are linked to these objects that can show to you that these objects must come back. And those objects don't have information. So we need to go beyond just asking for database. We need
I think you have made the point. And I can confirm, because I've been in writing my book, I went to the National Archives. It's called the National Archive in Kew Gardens. So in this archive, you will find that there's a lot of information, the information that implicates, that has some criminality on it, that has some embarrassment to the British government, that one is not available. In fact, in the case of the Mau Mau in Kenya, the information that helped the Kenyans to win their case in New Britain, it wasn't found in the National Archives. It was in a place called Hanslope Park, hidden, that nobody would ever come across it. So database, I think that it's good that you're building it, and it's understandable. But whatever you find, I think the point that is being made, you should make it open to the public, so that we can also engage as for society. I don't know whether Fred or Charity, you had anything else to add there on that question. There's a second question. The second question is on collaboration. Given the difficulties that we may have in terms of security, in terms of capacity, is there a possibility? The question is there a possibility for collaboration between our institutions here and communities in Uganda or other African places and those in the West, so that there's better access, there's better recognition of the fact that this artifact exists, it was taken by so and so, and this is what it means, and it's available to the countries, even if it's on a loan basis, or support, because they support us. These countries support us in many ways. They support us in trade, in aid, in military support. There could also be support to grow the database and museums and the capacity to preserve some of these very important. So to you, members of the panel, this offer an option for the preservation of our heritage and such artworks. Maybe this should go to...
I could just respond briefly on that. I think collaborations as museum, as the institutional, as individual, as a government, I think is very key. We as you spoke, we had the collaboration with British Museum in terms of capacity building. And during that process, we have access to the collections, especially on the Ugandan collections. And that's why the idea of some of these objects could be returned. And of course, we were looking at how we can manage to bring some of the artifacts for exhibition and share it with communities. And maybe it moves around, not just remain in Kampala, reaches to the communities. And you see it revives back the cultural knowledge. But two, we are trying to create a relationship with the Cambridge University, who had returned, at least for Cambridge being a university, I think their law is allowing them to, even if it is about learning, is allowing them to return some of the objects. The one which is a little bit difficult is the British Museum. And we are trying to build some relationship with the Oxford, and I'm aware Bunyoro Kingdom has engaged them, and we say, let's put more efforts to move on that. But I think we need the public voice. I think public voice and awareness in this. It shouldn't be like an individual aspect, me alone as a museum, but it should be the need for these objects is by the public. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Frederick?
Yes, I just want to add on what Nelson has just said. I think what has been happening is between the National Museum and the institutions in the UK. But as he said, it is really important that we open up the collaboration. And somebody needs to take the first step to bring on the general public and other relevant agencies, so that we go beyond the relationship between the National Museum and the institutions in the UK, because the artifacts we are talking about belong to Ugandans, belong to Africans, belong to all of us. So all of us must be involved in the processes. So if it is the National Museum, I think they should take the initiative to bring everybody on board. Civil society, government, relevant government agencies and departments, cultural institutions, and individuals. I think for me, that is the kind of collaboration I will advocate for.
Okay, thank you. We have another question, but before, can we hear from Charity? Charity, what are your thoughts on some of these questions? Charity seems to have
we have lost
gone off air.
Yeah.
Her network doesn't seem to be very stable.
Oh dear. There's another question on return, and I'd like you also to come back to this decolonization argument. You know, you raised it, but we need to get to the bottom of it. Oh, she's back. Charity, can you hear us? She's still connecting. There's another question on return and rebuilding relations, diplomatic relations. I think it was you, Frederick, who talked about the value of using these artifacts as a basis for furthering diplomatic ties and relationship between communities and countries. The question is, should we engage in provenance research, something like that? Are you aware about that? Maybe you could elaborate.
I think that is from Abiti, provenance research. I'm really out that.
Okay, I could explain. The idea about provenance research is more like giving information on the particular object, how the object got to be picked from the community, who collected, when they collected, how did the object reach to the museum. So the idea of tracing back the history of the object is about provenance research. What we know is that provenance research was solely being done by the Western European museums and scholars without engaging the origin countries where these objects were being picked. Where are the communities, where are the scholars from Uganda where the curators from Uganda, where the legal experts from Uganda be involved in the provenance research. I think to further the relationship is to bring in a inclusive, broader people to not only the work between a curator and a curator. We need to get scholars. We need to get legal people who can interpret some of the writings for us. The language, some of the language interpretation we don't understand. So Provenance Trust is the process to which that will even create more awareness to see that this is the object. These are the objects that were taken here. And I think it should not only be we go there, but after looking at those objects, we come back. We go back to the communities to inquire from them. Is it true these objects were picked there? How can they remake use of these objects? Can they rebuild also their relationship with the people who took the objects? Maybe kind of forgiveness, reconciliation. I think those are the things which we are looking at. Yes. This matoput, you see.
Matoput.
Yeah, the kind of forgiveness. I think this is what is happening in Namibia. For the Minister of Foreign Affairs, German government had to make apologies to Nama Herero people on the genocide because they did not only kill the people, they took objects and the human remains. I think what we don't talk about Uganda, it's whether we have human remains that are in some of the museums in Europe. They will be there. Those are some of the things. They did not take only objects, but they also took skulls, by the way.
Thank you. We have Charity back. We missed you. We had many questions. I don't know whether you have been following. Wanted to hear your views, for example, on possibilities of collaboration, on database, or the whole subject of decolonization. Where does it start? Where does it stop? And what do we see as a decolonized Uganda or a decolonized Africa? Those kind of questions. Very broad. Can you unmute?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
I had to switch to my phone. Great. I would just like to say, decolonization, as we talked about, is quite a process, and I think we may not be able to get rid of everything, but we can also transform things into something new. So I think that for the case of the museum still being like a colonial structure, I think that maybe I would propose that we look at it as, in order to decolonize it or turn it into something new, I would propose that we look at it like the griots in West Africa function, the ones who house all the knowledge and the history of their society. That new thing for all of us.
We can't hear you properly.
In terms of database and the other question is partnering or by talking to. I've had many. Let me go and. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
That's a bit better. That's a bit better.
Better? Yes.
Yes, that's a bit better. But,
sorry,
but we're
very
about
poor
to end.
internet connection.
Better summarize.
Yes, I'm going to summarize. I've had many wonderful conversations with young activists. Young people are also starting to look at decolonizing their own spaces. So, for example, young people from the UK who talk about zoos and museums also being colonial, or not colonial, but yeah, well, I guess yes, colonial in their own experience, as in they also are no longer happy with viewing other parts of the world in an older sense or in an older fashion. So I think it would help to also partner with these other activists in the UK, whether they be Black in diaspora or young activists and artists, to help us combat this these governments that are unwilling to listen.
Okay, I think I have to
repatriate are essentially on the same page with us.
Okay, I'm sorry, I have to switch because the reception is not very good, and we are running out of time. I want to ask each of you to say one parting word on the subject. Do we have are we optimistic about the future? Are we should we read the mood and the trend now from France, from Germany? Is Britain going to follow suit, in terms of their responsiveness to our demands to support our institutions and the return of these artifacts? What do you see the future as? Should we be happy that the trend is improving? And how do you see us going from here, forward? Starting with you, Frederick, 1 minute each.
Yeah, thank you very much. Actually, I'm equating this discussion to a pregnancy, because once it starts, there is no.
It's not going back.
It's not going back until the baby is out, and I think that's what that's the way I'm looking at this discussion.
So you have to nurse.
Yes,
even a pregnant mother, you need to give them sufficient nutrition.
Those are the discussions we are talking about, the collaboration, the research, until we have our objects returned.
Okay, Charity, your last word. Are you still with us?
I'm still here. I hope you can hear me.
Okay, your last word.
Yeah, I'm very much in agreement, and I think that we should never stop. And I think we are now seeing a change all around the world in the process of decolonization. So now is not the time to stop, but we have to continue until we are satisfied.
Okay, fantastic. And last but not least, our Nelson.
Yeah, to me, I look at two angles. Decolonization and restitution are two-way things. If one is moving, leaving the other one behind, we will not achieve. So it is a concerted effort by every one of us, and we're going to achieve this objective. It is not only now a Ugandan agenda, it is being owned by African Union. This restitution project is being owned by African Union, and the civil society organization, Open Society in Kenya, are campaigning for the regional demand for the restitution of artifacts of cultural property back to Africa. I think we need to build this network and engage not only as Ugandans, but build regional and African concerted effort. I think as an individual, we will be defeated. I think that is what.
Thank you very much, Nelson, Frederick, and Charity for the presentation. It has been a wonderful presentation, one that we learn much from. I think there are many points that have come up, but the most important is that return of artifacts or restitution is a small aspect of a wider problem of decolonization, so that when we hear about people talking about colonial injustices, when we hear people talking about reparations for slavery and things like that, when we hear people naming of streets and other geographical features, Uganda, part of a global movement, a movement that aims to address this history and the legacy in which we in Africa seem to be bound. The fear that we cannot look after our own artifacts, I think, is not well-founded. I think we can, and we should all support the collaborative efforts, both from the West and from Africa collaborations to push this agenda. I want to end there and thank Alliance Francaise for sponsoring this. I think it is a very interesting and very important subject, and one that we should continue going into the future. Thank you, participants. It's been really good to have questions and feedback from all of you. And may God bless